Welcome to Truth Behind History. Today we are diving into the war before Gettysburg. Picture mid-1863. Two nations in one geographic space, each convinced it carries the future on its shoulders. The Union's objective is blunt and enormous. Restore the United States by force of arms. Bring rebellious states back into the fold. Close the wound and make the map whole again. The Confederacy's objective is very different. It does not need to conquer the North. It needs to survive and be recognized. If it can defend its independence long enough, foreign governments might treat it as a country and political pressure could force a negotiated peace. Do you hear the asymmetry there? One side must restore a broken union. The other side must keep the break from being repaired. Now look beneath the flags and slogans and you find the machinery that moves armies. The North has an industrial base that outproduces the South by wide margins. Foundries, textile mills, armories, and a dense web of railroads that knit cities together. This is not just trivia. Trains mean soldiers can move hundreds of miles in days instead of weeks. Factories mean rifles, boots, artillery shells, and replacement parts arrive in quantity and with regularity. In war, reliability is power. The Union can mobilize, resupply, and replace losses on a scale the Confederacy struggles to match. The South fights with courage and skill, yet it is tethered to an economy built around agriculture and limited manufacturing. That means fewer locomotives, fewer rails, fewer workshops to repair what breaks. It also means a supply chain that is more brittle. When a single rail line is cut, a whole region can starve for ammunition. When a foundry burns, there may be no equivalent facility to pick up the slack. Strategy does not live in the sky. It lives in what you can move, feed, and fix. And then there is politics. Abraham Lincoln sits in the White House with a problem that is not just military. It is existential. If the Union cannot win decisively, what case does the federal government have to claim lasting legitimacy? Every stalemate tells Europe that the Confederacy might endure. Britain and France watch closely because cotton matters to their mills and because a divided America would change the balance of power on the Atlantic. Lincoln needs a clear victory to send two messages at once. To the North, that sacrifice has a purpose and reunion is possible. To foreign powers, that intervention would be a losing bet. So by mid-1863 the board is set. The Union aims to force unity back into being. The Confederacy aims to prove it cannot be forced. Industry and rail favor the North. Distance and scarcity strain the South. In Washington the clock of politics is ticking. In Richmond the gamble is that a dramatic strike might tip opinion at home and abroad. Before any famous ridge or hill comes into view, this is the pressure cooker both sides are living in. Objectives define the war. Economics shapes what those objectives cost. Politics decides how long the public will keep paying that cost. With that in mind, we can step onto the roads that are converging on a small Pennsylvania town and understand why every decision there will matter far beyond the map. Now we arrive at the critical moment before Gettysburg. The chessboard is already in motion, and the player making the boldest move is Robert E. Lee. By the summer of 1863, Virginia has borne the brunt of repeated campaigns. Fields are stripped bare, supply depots are thin, and the population is feeling the war's weight. Lee sees an opportunity. If he can carry the fight into the North, he can do three things at once: relieve Virginia's farms and towns from immediate strain, gather fresh supplies from Pennsylvania's rich countryside, and, most dangerously for the Union, provoke a political crisis by winning a decisive battle on Northern soil. Imagine the shock if Confederate troops marched through the towns of Pennsylvania and defeated Union forces in their own backyard. It would be a jolt to morale in the South and a gut punch to the North. But Lee's approach to command is just as important as his objectives. In the Confederate hierarchy, he enjoys near-total operational control. Richmond's civilian government largely trusts him to make his own calls without micromanagement. That gives him agility. He can adapt to changing conditions quickly without waiting for approval. But it also means the burden of success or failure sits almost entirely on his shoulders. A brilliant choice can change the war's trajectory in a day. A mistake can do the same, but in the opposite direction. Lee is a man maneuvering at high speed without a safety net. On the Union side, there's no time to wait and see what happens. Federal intelligence reports and scouts confirm Confederate movements across the Potomac. This isn't a small raid, it's an invasion. The Union's logistical machine, built on its industrial base and vast rail network, kicks into gear. Orders move swiftly through the chain of command. The Army of the Potomac begins repositioning with urgency, shifting its entire weight to intercept Lee before he can reach deeper into Pennsylvania. The North knows that every day lost gives the Confederates more freedom to choose the ground, take the supplies they want, and control the political narrative. So here, before a single shot is fired at Gettysburg, you have two forces racing toward each other with starkly different advantages. Lee with his streamlined command, bold intentions, and the element of surprise. The Union, with its superior logistics, rapid troop movements, and a clear understanding that this campaign is not just about land, it's about the will to continue the war. Both sides understand that the coming clash could tip the scales of the entire conflict. The question is not whether they will meet, but where, and on whose terms. The fields around Gettysburg in early July 1863 did not know they were about to become one of the most famous pieces of ground in American history. But as Union and Confederate forces collided, the landscape itself would shape the battle, and each day would tell its own story. Day 1 begins with Confederate momentum. Lee's forces push Union troops back through the streets of Gettysburg. Civilians watch from their windows as the blue uniforms fall back under the pressure. It looks like the Confederates might secure a quick victory, but there's a critical detail. They fail to seize the high ground south of town, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, and the ridgelines that form a natural fortress. The Union, battered but intact, consolidates there. It's like a chess player sacrificing a piece to gain a stronger position later. That oversight by the Confederates will matter for every fight that follows. Day 2 turns into a bloody struggle for the flanks. Lee's plan is to break the Union line from the sides, striking at Little Round Top and the wheat field. Imagine rocky slopes, boulder-strewn fields, and the heat of July pressing down. Union defenders, aware that losing those positions would unravel their entire line, fight with a desperation that becomes legend. The attacks fail, but not without horrific cost on both sides. The fields are littered with men who will never rise again. The Confederates find themselves expending resources they cannot easily replace, and every failed assault makes the Union's hold on the high ground even stronger. Day 3 brings one of the most infamous moments in Civil War history, Pickett's charge. Lee orders a massive frontal assault across open farmland toward the center of the Union line. Picture thousands of gray-clad soldiers advancing shoulder to shoulder under cannon fire, the air thick with smoke and the ground trembling under their boots. Union artillery and rifle fire tear gaps into the advancing ranks, but still they come. They reach the stone wall at the crest, but the momentum breaks. In less than an hour, the Confederate army suffers catastrophic losses. This isn't just a failed attack, it's the end of Lee's ability to take the offensive for the rest of the war. And beneath all this, logistics and terrain quietly play their roles. The Union supply lines remain intact, ensuring ammunition and reinforcements arrive when needed. Their defensive positions force the Confederates to overextend, attacking uphill over long distances. The land itself becomes an ally to the defenders, while for the attackers it's a gauntlet of death. By the close of the third day, the story is clear. Gettysburg has shifted from being a possible Confederate triumph to a resounding Union stand. But the victory comes with a price measured in blood, setting the stage for the staggering human and material costs that follow. When the guns fell silent at Gettysburg, the silence was almost worse than the noise. Over 50,000 soldiers lay dead, wounded, or missing. That is more than the entire population of many towns in that era, gone or broken in just 3 days. Imagine the families waiting miles away, scanning the horizon for letters or messengers, not knowing if their sons, brothers, or fathers would ever return. Some communities would never recover. In certain counties, entire generations of men were nearly wiped out, leaving demographic scars that would last for decades. But the cost was not only counted in lives. War is expensive, and the way each side paid for it reveals deeper truths about their economies and their futures. The Union financed its war effort through bonds and taxation, a system that, while burdensome, kept the currency stable enough to maintain purchasing power. Investors, both large and small, literally bought into the war's success, expecting to be paid back if the Union prevailed. The Confederacy faced a harsher reality. Lacking the same financial infrastructure, they increasingly relied on printing more paper money to cover expenses. At first, it seemed like a simple solution, but every new note issued without matching resources behind it eroded its value. Prices soared, and soon hyperinflation gripped the South. A loaf of bread could cost more than a soldier's daily pay, and even those with gold or silver often found that goods were simply unavailable. It was a reminder that paper promises cannot feed an army if the economy beneath them is collapsing. The civilian population bore much of the strain. Conscription pulled more men from farms and workshops, leaving women, children, and the elderly to take on new roles, running businesses, managing harvests, and caring for the wounded. In some areas, armies seized resources outright, leaving families with little more than what they could hide or protect. The war blurred the line between the battlefield and the home front, making every civilian a participant in its hardships. Gettysburg, then, was not just a turning point in military terms, it was a crucible for the economies and societies of both North and South. The human toll was visible in graveyards and hospitals. The material toll was etched into ledgers, price lists, and empty shelves. And together, these costs would weigh heavily on the decisions both governments made in the months to come. Gettysburg did not end the Civil War, but it reshaped its trajectory. For the Confederacy, the battle marked the high-water mark of its strategic reach. Lee's bold gamble to invade the North had promised the potential for a decisive victory, one that could sway foreign governments and Northern public opinion. Instead, his army limped back across the Potomac, battered, bloodied, and forever stripped of the momentum that had carried it into Pennsylvania. From this point forward, the Confederacy would find itself increasingly on the defensive, reacting to Union moves rather than dictating the terms of engagement. This shift in the battlefield balance reverberated far beyond military maps. In Europe, particularly in Britain and France, political leaders had watched the Confederate advance with interest. Recognition of the Confederacy or even mediation in its favor was not impossible if Lee had secured a clear victory. But Gettysburg changed the diplomatic calculus. No longer did it seem that the South could secure the kind of decisive win that would make recognition worth the risk. Foreign leaders were unwilling to gamble their political capital on a cause that now seemed to be losing ground. For the Union, Gettysburg was more than a tactical success. It was a political lifeline. Abraham Lincoln, facing a war-weary Northern public, now had a triumph to point to. It bolstered morale in the cities, calmed fears in the border states, and gave renewed confidence to investors financing the war effort. Every victory made it easier to sell bonds, to raise the taxes needed, and to justify the sacrifices being demanded of ordinary citizens. But there was another layer, one that touched the very structure of the federal government. Wartime necessity expanded Washington's reach into areas that had once been left to the states or to private enterprise. The war demanded centralized coordination, in railroads, in industry, in communications, in finance. The longer the conflict lasted, the more this machinery of centralized power became normal, even expected. And while some saw it as a temporary emergency measure, history has shown that once a government builds the tools to direct an economy and a society in wartime, it rarely puts them away completely when peace returns. So, the strategic and political consequences of Gettysburg were not just about one army retreating and another holding the field. They were about a shift in momentum, a recalibration of foreign policy, a reinforcement of political will, and the quiet but significant growth of centralized authority. In war, victories can shape more than the next battle, they can reshape the rules by which a nation governs itself. In the years after Gettysburg, the facts of the battle became tangled with the stories people wanted to tell about it. Veterans, politicians, and writers all shaped the memory of those 3 days, each with their own agenda. For some, Gettysburg became a symbol of valor and unity, a place where Americans, even in civil war, demonstrated courage worth celebrating. For others, it was a stage for building legends, polishing reputations, and quietly overlooking mistakes that had cost lives. Over time, the clean lines of heroism often replaced the messier realities of fear, confusion, and chance. The process of myth-making served political purposes as well. Leaders on both sides could recast the battle to fit their vision of the war's meaning. For the Union, it became proof of inevitable victory and the righteousness of the cause. For the Confederacy, it could be framed as a valiant struggle against impossible odds, a way to preserve honor even in defeat. Memory became as much a tool as rifles or artillery had been during the fight itself. Yet beneath these narratives, moral questions lingered. Centralized wartime power had grown immense. Draft laws, press censorship, the suspension of habeas corpus in some areas. Were these measures necessary to preserve the nation, or were they dangerous precedents that eroded civil liberties? And how do you weigh the sacrifice of individual freedoms against the goal of national survival? Those questions did not end with Appomattox, they still echo in debates about government authority in times of crisis today. There was also the matter of individual agency. Amid the grand strategies and sweeping troop movements, history can forget the choices made by ordinary soldiers, local civilians, and even junior officers. A single decision, when to hold a position, when to retreat, when to help a wounded stranger, could ripple outward in ways that shaped the battle's outcome. These personal acts, often unnoticed in official reports, remind us that history is not only made by generals and presidents. So when we remember Gettysburg, we should be careful not to settle for the neat version of events. The reality was complex, morally challenging, and deeply human. Myths can inspire, but they can also obscure the lessons we most need to remember. Gettysburg's echoes reach far beyond the summer of 1863. It was not only a turning point in the Civil War, but also a study in how nations wage war, how they sustain it, and what they become in the process. The first lesson is that military victories do not happen in isolation. They are built on foundations of logistics, economics, and political will. The Union's ability to feed, arm, and move its forces efficiently was just as decisive as any single maneuver on the battlefield. Without that backbone, even the most courageous stand would have crumbled. A second lesson lies in the limits of boldness. Lee's invasion was daring, but it also reveals how strategy without sustainable resources can lead to disaster. Momentum is powerful, yet when it collides with entrenched opposition backed by deeper reserves, it can shatter in an instant. This is true not only in war but in every contest where planning and supply must match ambition. Then there is the quiet, more unsettling lesson: war centralizes power. In the name of necessity, governments take control of industries, transportation, and information. They expand taxation, enforce conscription, and limit certain freedoms. Often, the argument is that such powers will be surrendered after victory. But history shows that the machinery built for emergencies tends to linger, shaping peacetime policies in ways few anticipated. Gettysburg reminds us that the tools forged in crisis can outlive the crisis itself. Finally, we see that history's most enduring truths come not just from the grand narrative, but from the individuals within it. Soldiers who stood their ground under fire, civilians who risked safety to care for the wounded, officers who made decisions in minutes that would alter the course of days. Their actions remind us that in the sweep of history, the human element remains irreplaceable. So as we look back on Gettysburg, we should see more than just a battle. We should see a crossroads where strategy, economy, politics, and personal courage converged. And we should recognize that the questions it raises about power, freedom, and the cost of unity are not locked in the past. They are questions each generation must answer for itself. If you enjoyed exploring these ideas, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to dive even deeper into history's hidden chapters, check out my book History They Tried to Erase. Link is in the description. There's a whole world of overlooked stories waiting to be uncovered, so if thoughtful and entertaining history is your thing, stick around. There's much more to come.